Have you ever, met a total stranger at a hotel breakfast buffet? Or maybe on one of those walking tours?
Oh, or during one of those horribly delayed flights.
Yes, exactly. You're just sitting there, and within hours, you have completely bared your soul to them.
Right.
I mean, you've shared your entire life story, your deepest fears, your secret hopes for the future. It's like you've practically lived a whole lifetime with this person in the span of, what, 3 days?
Pretty much, yeah.
And then you pack your bags, you fly home, and poof,
Ghosted.
ghosted.
Yeah.
You never speak to them again once the trip ends. And it's an incredibly common experience,
Uh-huh.
but it leaves you sitting there wondering, was that even a real friendship?
Well, it really makes you question the metrics we use for human connection, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because, we are so heavily conditioned to judge the validity of a relationship by how long it lasts. We just inherently assume that real has to mean permanent.
Right. Like if it didn't last 10 years, it didn't
hmm
mean anything.
Exactly. But the psychology of travel challenges that entire framework. It really forces us to reconsider what a genuine bond actually looks like when you completely remove the pressure of time and future expectations.
Which is exactly what we are getting into today on this deep dive.
I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, so our mission today is to unpack this really fascinating piece from Psychology Today by a mental health practitioner named Ankita Guchet. It's called The Brief Life of the Travel Friendship.
It's a great piece.
It really is. We are putting these intense, short-lived relationships under the microscope. We want to figure out the neurological and psychological mechanics behind why our brains allow us to bond so fiercely with complete strangers on the road, and why these connections almost inevitably evaporate the second we get home.
Right, and why that evaporation isn't actually a failure of the friendship at all.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really understand why we connect with people on a trip, we probably shouldn't start with the relationship itself, right?
No, you actually have to start by looking inward. You have to look at what the physical act of traveling does to your brain and, really, your whole sense of identity.
Because you are definitely not operating as your normal Tuesday morning self when you're wandering around the cobblestone streets of some foreign city.
Not at all. You have physically and mentally entered what anthropologists call a liminal space.
Liminal space. Okay, so like a transitional zone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It is a threshold between your everyday established identities. I mean, think about how your life is structured at home.
Lots of routines.
Yeah, it's a highly rigid network of roles. You are a mid-level manager, or you're a graduate student, or maybe the responsible older sibling or a parent.
And every interaction is filtered through that.
Every single one. Your
Those roles.
interactions at home are constantly weighed against the expectations of those labels. But the moment you step off a plane in a new country, those structural roles they vanish.
Wow. Yeah, because to the people around you, you aren't any of those things.
Right. You become simply a traveler.
It makes me think of like an actor stepping off a stage. Because when you're at home, you're constantly reading from this script that was written by your job description, your family dynamics, your social circles.
That's a really good way to put it.
Right, like you know exactly what your character is supposed to say, but when you travel, someone basically takes the script out of your hands.
They do.
You're suddenly forced to improvise your personality from scratch, without any of the usual prompts. Does that mean the person you are on vacation is actually a fundamentally different version of yourself?
Well, without the script, your cognitive load completely shifts. At home, your brain is using a massive amount of processing power just to maintain those roles and predict the routine outcomes of your day.
Okay.
But in a liminal space, that predictive machinery is totally disrupted. There's this really fascinating recent cognitive science research that looks specifically at the neurological impact of this.
Oh, really? What did they find?
It demonstrates that when we are placed in novel, highly immersive environments, our cognitive rigidity actually breaks down.
Meaning what exactly? Like what is breaking down?
So your brain's default mode network, that's the part responsible for self-reflection and dwelling on the past or worrying about the future. It starts to quiet down.
Oh, wow. So the anxious part of your brain just sort of takes a back seat.
Exactly. Because you are suddenly in an environment where you have to pay attention to your immediate surroundings, your brain enters a state of heightened plasticity.
Okay.
And this research shows that this state radically increases our openness to new experiences and significantly enhances our baseline well-being.
So because your brain isn't bogged down by, predicting the commute or worrying about an email thread, it literally frees up biological bandwidth.
Precisely. You shift from a state of routine maintenance into a state of active discovery. And the crucial thing here is that this openness, it isn't compartmentalized.
What do you mean?
Well, when your brain is in a state of discovery, you aren't just open to trying a new type of street food or exploring a new museum. You become fundamentally more open to the humans around you.
So the environment itself is altering your neurobiology to prime you for connection.
Yes. But to go back to your earlier question, are you a fundamentally different person? It's less about becoming a new character and more about becoming an unedited version of who you already are.
Unedited, I like that.
Yeah. The traits you exhibit while traveling, like curiosity, spontaneity, or profound vulnerability,
Mhm.
those are all completely yours. They are just the parts of your personality that are usually suppressed by the exhausting demands of your daily routine.
So you are still you, but you're a you
Mhm.
that exists entirely without context or like historical baggage.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've established that the liminal space strips away the armor, the script is gone, our cognitive rigidity is down, and we are unedited and primed for discovery.
Right.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. How do we get from just being open to practically giving a random backpacker the peon to our soul?
It is quite a leap.
Because, I mean, I might be in a great open mood on a Saturday at my local grocery store,
Yeah.
but I'm certainly not telling the guy in the produce aisle my deepest regrets in life.
No, probably not. The catalyst for that rapid leap from stranger to confidant is a psychological mechanism known as situational intimacy.
Situational intimacy.
Yeah,
Okay.
so when you are traveling, you aren't just existing in a novel environment, you are actively having to navigate it. You are trying to figure out a confusing subway system in a language you don't speak, or you're lost in an unknown neighborhood as it starts to rain.
Or you're just sitting at a shared table trying to figure out a foreign menu.
Right, exactly.
But honestly, isn't that just a trauma bond?
How do you mean?
Well, like, if you and a stranger are both incredibly stressed out because you missed the last train to Munich, aren't you just clinging to each other out of desperation? That doesn't sound like real intimacy. That just sounds like shared panic.
Ah, okay. That's a really important distinction to make. A trauma bond is rooted in an ongoing cycle of abuse, fear, and dependency.
Oh, right. Very different.
Very different. What we are talking about here with situational intimacy is rooted in low-stakes vulnerability. It's not about shared terror. It's about shared disorientation.
Shared disorientation.
Right. You are experiencing a high degree of novelty and a mild degree of vulnerability at the exact same time, and you are sharing that incredibly specific cocktail of feelings with the stranger standing right next to you.
So it's the shared disorientation that acts as the glue.
Exactly. And the neuroscience behind this is incredibly compelling. I was reading about this recent study that mapped out exactly what happens in the brain during these moments.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when you navigate a novel, slightly disorienting experience alongside someone else, your brain's reward system basically kicks into overdrive. The novelty triggers the release of dopamine.
Which makes everything feel exciting and rewarding.
Yes. But at the exact same time, the shared vulnerability of the situation triggers the release of oxytocin.
And oxytocin is the trust hormone.
Right, exactly. It's the hormone primarily responsible for trust and social bonding.
Wow. So it's almost like a neurological hack.
It really is.
Because instead of taking 3 years to slowly build up trust with a coworker through repeated, safe interactions, your brain just dumps the trust hormone all at once simply because you and a stranger successfully figured out a complicated bus schedule together.
That is exactly what is happening. You form a micro-community. Whether you're in a hostel dorm sitting next to each other on a turbulent flight or just taking shelter from the rain under an awning, you become instant allies.
Simply because you are sharing the exact same moment of exploration.
Right. The shared vulnerability acts as a massive accelerant for the oxytocin release.
But wait, there's another major factor here that we have to talk about. It's not just the brain chemistry of the shared experience, right? It's the unspoken agreement between the two of you that this is entirely temporary.
Oh, yes. The stranger on the train effect.
Yes. Let's dig into the mechanics of that.
It is a foundational paradox in social psychology. Humans find it significantly easier to practice radical emotional honesty with someone they know with absolute certainty they will never see again.
Which, on the surface, sounds completely counterintuitive.
It does.
Why on earth is it easier, and why does it feel safer, to spill your deepest, darkest secrets to someone you met in a hostel lounge 3 hours ago, compared to a friend you've known for 10 years?
It all comes down to the concept of social stakes.
Okay.
Think about the intricate web of a long-term friendship. If you sit down with a friend of 10 years and confess to a deeply embarrassing secret, or you admit that you think your career is a complete failure, or you reveal doubts about your marriage.
There are massive potential consequences.
Massive. That friend is deeply embedded in your social architecture. They know your spouse, they know your parents, they know your colleagues.
Right, once you put that information out there, it exists in your real life forever. You literally can't unring the bell.
Exactly. Your revelation has the power to permanently shift the dynamic of your everyday life. The social stakes are incredibly high, which naturally makes us highly guarded and self-editing even with people we deeply love.
But with the stranger at the hostel,
The stakes are absolute zero.
because they don't know your boss, they don't know your ex, they have zero context for your life.
Precisely. The fleeting nature of the connection completely removes the fear of judgment or social fallout. You can hand them the absolute rawest, most unpolished version of your inner thoughts, knowing that tomorrow they will get on a plane to a different continent and take your secrets with them.
Wow.
Paradoxically, the guarantee that the connection will end is exactly what makes the emotional honesty feel so profoundly safe.
Okay, so you have this perfect storm.
Yeah.
Your cognitive load is down because you're in a liminal space.
Yes.
Your brain is flooded with dopamine from the novelty of travel.
Yeah.
You are getting massive hits of oxytocin from shared vulnerability. And your fear of judgment is entirely neutralized by the stranger on the train effect.
It is literally the biological and psychological recipe for the deepest, fastest connection of your life.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
But, okay, if the brain chemistry is practically overflowing with reward signals, and we feel totally unconditionally safe with this person, why is it that 3 weeks later, I'm sitting on my couch at home, leaving them on read when they reply to my Instagram story?
It's the classic crash.
Right. We promised to stay in touch. We made elaborate plans for them to come visit me. And then the communication just dies. Why does it fade so remarkably fast?
Because these friendships are not just born in a specific context. They are entirely dependent on it.
Right.
We talked about that liminal space, the freedom from the script of your daily life. Well, the moment you unpack your bags at home, you are violently forced to pick that script back up.
You're thrust back into reality.
You're instantly back in the rigid structure of your life. Suddenly, you're dealing with different time zones, demanding work schedules, family obligations, and all your existing social circles who require your time and emotional energy.
It's kind of like taking this really vibrant, exotic, tropical plant that you found in the rainforest and trying to transplant it into a chilly, fluorescent-lit office cubicle.
That is a brilliant analogy.
Right. Because it's not that the plant was fake or that the beauty of it was an illusion. It just literally lacks the environmental mechanics to survive the new climate.
That is an incredibly accurate way to look at it, and the sociology of human networks backs this up completely. If we look at the mechanics of relationships, specifically the foundational research by a sociologist named Mark Granovetter, we see that relationships are not just sustained by emotional desire.
What are they sustained by?
They are sustained by structural mechanics, namely proximity and repeated low-friction interaction.
Wait, what do you mean by low-friction interaction?
Meaning it doesn't take a monumental effort to engage with them. A coworker is a low-friction interaction because you share a physical space.
You're just already there.
Right. A childhood friend is low friction because you share a dense web of mutual acquaintances and history. But when you take a travel friendship and remove the shared geography, proximity vanishes. Sustaining the bond suddenly requires high friction effort.
Oh, I see. You have to actively try.
Yes. You have to schedule a FaceTime call across an 8-hour time difference. You have to explain the entire backstory of your terrible boss just so they understand a 5-minute venting session.
It's exhausting. And honestly, it goes back to what we were saying earlier about the travel version of yourself.
How so?
Well, that spontaneous, deeply curious, highly vulnerable person who stayed up until 3 a.m. talking about the meaning of life. You can't be that person when you're rushing to make a 9 a.m. Tuesday status meeting about quarterly deliverables.
Exactly. The foundational conditions that shape the connection are entirely gone. Without that shared liminal environment, the friendship naturally begins to feel somewhat distant or out of place in your everyday life. The conversations dry up because the shared context has completely vanished. It's just a mechanical reality of how human networks function.
So, because these connections almost always die out when the trip ends, it leaves you with this lingering sense of confusion, like, how are we supposed to value them? Was the whole thing just superficial?
Not at all.
Because it feels like, did we waste massive amounts of emotional energy getting to know someone so deeply, only to just let them drift away?
We really have to dismantle the idea that short-lived automatically means superficial. That is a massive societal misconception. Remember Mark Granovetter, the sociologist we just talked about?
Yeah, with the low friction interactions.
Right. Well, his research didn't just explain why relationships fade. It introduced a highly influential concept called the strength of weak ties.
Okay, weak ties. Let's dive into the mechanics of that. Why is a weak tie actually a good thing?
In network sociology, your strong ties are your close friends, your family, your partner.
The core group.
Yes, they provide deep emotional support, but they also require massive amounts of maintenance. And they tend to share your exact worldview and social circles.
Makes sense.
Weak ties, on the other hand, are brief, situational, or peripheral relationships. They are the acquaintance you chat with at the dog park, or the barista you see every morning, or the stranger you bond with on a train in Italy.
And Granovetter argues these are actually crucial for us.
Absolutely essential. His mechanics show that weak ties serve as bridges. They connect us to completely different social clusters, exposing us to new information, diverse perspectives, and different ways of living that we would literally never encounter within our echo chamber of strong ties.
Oh, wow.
Furthermore, they provide a sense of belonging and connection to the broader human race without the heavy emotional taxation and maintenance required by strong ties. Travel friendships are arguably the most potent form of weak ties.
That perfectly contextualizes the story from the article's author. So Ankita Guchet, she shares this deeply personal reflection that really anchors this whole concept.
Yeah, her story is fascinating.
She details how her life has been incredibly nomadic. She moved from India to the U.S. for university, then to the U.K. for postgraduate training, and eventually traveled to over 40 different countries.
That's amazing.
Over those years, she estimates she met literally hundreds of people.
A staggering amount of situational intimacy to process.
Right. And she writes about these incredibly vivid moments, bonding over Middle Eastern hotel breakfasts, taking long, reflective European train journeys, sitting in quiet cafes where neither person even spoke the same language, but they still managed to share a connection.
Just vibing in a liminal space.
Exactly. For a few days, or sometimes literally just a few hours, their lives intersected in these profoundly meaningful ways. But she admits that today, looking back, only a tiny handful of those hundreds of friendships still exist in any real capacity.
And she notes that initially, reconciling that fact felt really difficult for her. How could something that felt so chemically, emotionally real disappear with so little resistance?
Right. Which forces us to ask the ultimate question here. If these people aren't friends, in the traditional long-term sense, how do we categorize them? What mental box do we put them in so that we can appreciate them without feeling guilty that we lost touch?
Well, the first step is recognizing that human relationships do not exist on a binary.
Right. It's not all or nothing.
Exactly. It is not a strict division between lifelong soulmate and meaningless passing acquaintance. There's an incredibly rich spectrum in between. Now, it is worth noting that a small percentage of travel friendships do transition into lasting bonds.
Wait, really? Why is that? What allows that specific tropical plant to survive the office cubicle?
It comes down to the foundational ingredients of trust. If you look at some classic psychology research, like the famous study that generated the 36 questions that lead to love, it proves that mutual vulnerability and reciprocal self-disclosure are the absolute building blocks of long-term intimacy.
Oh, okay.
Because the liminal space of travel artificially forces that deep mutual vulnerability so quickly, it essentially speedruns the trust-building process.
Oh, I see.
If you happen to also have deep personal alignment in your core values and lifestyles, that trust can sometimes be strong enough to survive the friction of distance when you return home.
But that is definitely the exception, not the rule.
Very much the exception. The vast majority of these connections are simply meant to belong exclusively to the journey itself. They become an inextricable part of the emotional landscape of the place you visited.
That's a really beautiful way to look at it.
The person you got hopelessly lost with in a new city, the stranger who shared a midnight conversation about the trajectory of your life, they are woven into the memory of that specific geography. And honestly, that is exactly where they belong.
Yeah. Trying to pull them out of that context and force them into your daily routine often diminishes the magic of what the interaction actually was.
Exactly.
So, if we are going to distill all of this down to a core takeaway for you listening today, it's this. The fading of a travel friendship isn't a failure. It is a perfectly, beautifully contained feature of the human experience.
Well said.
You can deeply cherish the memory of the stranger you explored a city with, without carrying the heavy, unnecessary pressure of making that connection last forever. Some things are profound precisely because they are temporary. They give us a glimpse of our unedited selves, remind us of our capacity to connect, and then release us back into our lives.
Which leaves us with a fascinating, slightly provocative thought to mull over.
Oh, I love these. Let's hear it.
We've spent all this time discussing how shedding our daily roles and stepping into a liminal space abroad allows us to connect with strangers in this deeply authentic, oxytocin-fueled way.
Right.
But what if we tried deliberately applying those mechanics right here at home?
Wait, really? How?
Well, what if the next time you walk into your local neighborhood coffee shop, you actively tried shedding your script? If you consciously left your job title and your daily anxieties at the door, could you artificially replicate that profound stranger on the train effect with the person sitting at the next table?
That is an amazing challenge. Walking into a totally familiar space, but actively choosing to be the unedited traveler version of yourself, just to see who you might connect with.
It might completely change how you view your own neighborhood.
It really might. But until you try that, the next time you find yourself bearing your soul to a total stranger over a delayed flight or a hotel breakfast buffet, don't worry about getting their Instagram handle. Just enjoy the conversation. Let them live perfectly in that memory.